I'm Jordan, and I'm 26 years old. My great grandfather's funeral was supposed to be about honoring his memory, but instead, it turned into the most humiliating day of my life. I watched my family parents who never saw me and a brother who mocked my every step divide up his banking empire like vultures, while I was handed a single, weathered envelope with a plane ticket. Welcome to Sibling Scars and Revenge. Have you ever felt like you're invisible in your own family? Please, share your story in the comments below. Just like right now, I'm out for a drive to find some peace of mind. What about you? Where are you watching from? And what time is it there? I'd love to connect with you. The air in the lawyer's office was thick, with the scent of old mahogany and expensive perfume. Outside, the London rain drummed a rhythmic, uncaring beat against the tall windows of the city office. Inside, the atmosphere was clinical, methodical. It was a boardroom meeting disguised as a mourning period. My father, Jeffrey, sat in a bespoke charcoal suit, his fingers drumming on his knee, in a way that suggested he was already calculating the interest rates on his new liquidity. My mother, Stephanie, sat perfectly poised, her black lace veil pushed back just enough to show eyes that hadn't seen a single tear, only the gleam of the crystal chandelier reflecting in her pupils. Then there was Tyler, my older brother. He leaned back in his leather chair, looking less like a grieving grandson and more like a man waiting for his bonus check. He caught my eye and smirked, a look that said he already knew the hierarchy of this room, and I was at the very bottom of the balance sheet. I sat at the far end of the table, my hands folded neatly in my lap. I didn't cry. I didn't fidget. I had spent the last 4 years working as a risk consultant, and I knew how to read a room. I knew when a deal was going south. Looking at the three of them, I realized the emotional audit was complete. I was a liability to them, an overhead cost they were looking to write off. The lawyer, a man whose voice sounded like dry parchment, cleared his throat. He began reading the will of Arthur Thompson, the man who had built Thompson Global Banking, from a single brick and mortar office into a multi-billion-dollar legacy. To my son, Jeffrey, I leave the controlling interest in the London commercial headquarters and the family estate in the Cotswolds. The estimated value of the property alone was $60 million. My father didn't even blink. He just nodded, as if receiving a $60 million house was a fundamental right, like oxygen. To my daughter-in-law, Stephanie, I leave the art collection and the Mediterranean villa. Another $50 million in assets handed over in a single sentence. My mother dabbed at her dry eyes with a silk handkerchief, her lips curling into a satisfied line. To my grandson, Tyler, I leave the luxury vehicle collection, the private yacht, and the penthouse overlooking the Thames. Tyler actually pumped his fist, the sound of his heavy Rolex clinking against the table. I waited. My heart didn't race. I had no illusions about my place in this family. I was the one who stayed late in the basement archives, cleaning up the messy data entries that Tyler was too lazy to touch. I was the invisible ghost in the machine, maintaining the boring ledgers and filing the compliance paperwork that kept the lights on while they spent the profits. To them, I wasn't a banker. I was just a glorified clerk who knew how to use a spreadsheet. What they didn't know was that Arthur had strategically positioned me as the lead analyst through an independent consulting firm he'd set up, Vanguard Risk Solutions. I fixed their disasters under a pseudonym hidden behind a heavy wall of non-disclosure agreements. They thought they were hiring world-class outside experts to save them. They never realized it was the clerk from the basement doing the work. I expected a share not for the greed of it, but as a recognition of the labor I'd invested. Then, the lawyer looked at me. His eyes held a flicker of something that might have been pity. But in this office, pity carried no cash value. And finally, to my great-granddaughter Jordan, I leave this envelope. That was it. No mention of the bank, no share in the properties, no seat at the board, just a single, weathered envelope slid across the mahogany table like a discarded receipt. The silence that followed wasn't respectful, it was predatory. Tyler broke it first with a sharp, bark-like laugh that echoed off the wood paneling. He leaned over, his eyes dancing with the cruel light. "Well, Jordan," he sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. "Looks like the old man finally saw through you. A plane ticket and an envelope? Maybe he wanted you to learn how to write a proper job application for once. My mother chuckled softly, a sound like glass breaking. Now, Tyler, don't be mean. I'm sure there's something very meaningful inside. A letter of advice, perhaps. After all, Jordan was always the one who preferred books to business. My father didn't even look at me. He was already leaning toward the lawyer, asking about the transfer of the Cotswolds deed. I was already invisible to them. I was a zero on their ledger. I didn't answer them. I didn't defend my years of service or remind them who had saved their reputations during the last audit. I didn't beg for a bigger slice of the empire. I simply reached out and took the envelope. It was heavier than it looked. I opened it right there, under their watchful, mocking eyes. Inside was a first-class plane ticket to Dubai, dated for tonight. And tucked behind the ticket was an old, tarnished fountain pen. It was the one Arthur used to carry in his breast pocket, the one he said he used to sign his first major contract. My brother leaned in, squinting at the pen. An old pen and a ticket to the desert? Tyler laughed again, the sound louder this time. Wow, he really did leave you the scraps. You're the billionaire's granddaughter, and you're leaving with office supplies. I looked at the pen, then I looked at my family. In their eyes, I saw a profound sense of triumph. They thought they had won. They thought they had finally pushed the spare out of the nest with nothing but a used pen to show for it. I felt a strange, cold clarity settle over me. This wasn't a tragedy. This wasn't a loss. This was a closing statement. For 26 years, I had been the silent investor in their version of family, and now I realized it had been a subscription I was no longer willing to fund. My loyalty had been a luxury they'd overdrafted for years, and today, the account was closed. I stood up, the movement slow and deliberate. I didn't look at the $60 million estate papers or the yacht deeds. I tucked the envelope into my bag and gripped the fountain pen. "If you'll excuse me," I said, my voice calm and clinical. "I have a flight to catch." The laughter followed me all the way to the elevator. I could hear my mother telling the lawyer how dramatic I'd always been. I could hear Tyler telling a joke about me becoming a street scribe in Dubai. But as the elevator doors closed, the mahogany office disappeared. The laughter faded. I looked at my reflection in the polished steel doors. I didn't see a victim. I didn't see a girl who had lost an inheritance. I saw a woman who had just been given the ultimate risk assessment. My family was a failing asset. It was time to divest. I stood on the corner and watched a black cab approach, its orange light glowing through the mist. As I raised my hand to hail it, I realized my fingers were perfectly steady. There was no tremor of grief, no surge of panic. My mind was doing what it had been trained to do through years of analyzing failing companies and high-risk portfolios. I was performing a postmortem on my relationship with the people whose names shared my birth certificate. This wasn't a family breakdown. It was a liquidation. The driver nodded, and we pulled away into the sluggish stream of London traffic. I leaned my head against the cool glass of the window and watched the familiar landmarks of the city slide past. My parents, Jeffrey and Stephanie, had spent decades treating me as an insurance policy. I was the one who was supposed to be sensible. I was the one who would stay behind and manage the boring details while they lived the life that Arthur's money provided. They hadn't just stolen my inheritance, they had attempted to steal my future by assuming I would always be there to clean up their messes. I reached into my bag and pulled out the old fountain pen. I turned it over in my hand, feeling the weight of the silver. Arthur had always told me that a pen was mightier than a sword, because a sword only takes what's in front of it, but a pen can claim the world, before anyone even realizes a war has started. By the time we reached the outskirts of London, the rain had turned into a steady downpour. I opened my phone and looked at the family group chat one last time. It was a digital fever dream of unearned arrogance. Tyler had posted a picture of a vintage Ferrari he was already planning to buy. My mother was discussing the color of the new drapes for the $60 million estate. Not once did my name appear. I moved the chat to the bottom of the list, archived and out of sight. I treated them like a non-performing loan still on the books, but no longer worth the daily attention. Heathrow Terminal 5 was a cavern of glass and steel. I moved through the check-in process with a mechanical efficiency that would have made a compliance officer proud. The woman at the first-class desk looked at my ticket, then up at me, her professional smile widening. "Welcome, Miss Thompson," she said. Will you be requiring any assistance with your luggage? Just one bag, I replied. I'm traveling light. I was traveling lighter than I ever had. I had left 26 years of expectations in a mahogany paneled office. I had left the burden of being the responsible daughter on a chair that I was never going to sit in again. In the lounge, I found a quiet corner overlooking the runways. I ordered a glass of water and pulled out my laptop. I wasn't going to spend this flight watching movies. I was going to do what I did best. I was going to audit the situation. I started a new spreadsheet. At the top, I wrote a single word: sovereign. Fact: my great-grandfather Arthur was a man who planned 10 steps ahead in every business deal he ever made. Fact: he left the visible, flashy assets to the people he knew would blow through them. Fact: he left an old pen and a ticket to Dubai to me. I looked at the pen again. Why Dubai? Arthur's empire was rooted in London, New York, and Geneva. Dubai was a relatively new frontier for the bank. The cabin of the first-class suite was a silent, pressurized sanctuary. At 30,000 feet, the world below disappeared, replaced by a soft indigo twilight. I leaned back, my fingers tracing the cold silver of the pen. My family thought I was flying toward an exit. They didn't realize I was finally returning to the blueprints of a building I had spent years holding together with my own two hands. I thought about the invisible chain I had worn for a decade. People often mistake silence for weakness. They assume she's a doormat. But for me, my silence wasn't a lack of courage, it was a survival strategy. It was a calculated decision to protect the only person in that family who actually saw me. Arthur had been the sun that the entire Thompson system orbited. In his final years, he was frail. I knew that if he saw the cracks my father and brother were creating, it would have killed him faster than the age did. So I became the silent guarantor of his peace. I was the one who stood in the shadows, catching the falling glass before it could shatter on the floor and wake him up. While Tyler was busy in the VIP booths of Soho, spending $5,000 on magnums of champagne, I was in the basement of Thompson Global Banking. I was the one who discovered the $300 million hole Jeffrey had managed to create through a series of innovative offshore investments that were actually just glorified gambling. Jeffrey, my father, liked to talk about the intuition of a banker, but he never realized I was the one constantly re-sewing the seams. In 2022, when the regulators were 2 days away from freezing our assets, it wasn't Jeffrey who fixed it. He was at a charity gala in Monaco. I was the one who stayed awake for 72 hours straight, rerouting assets, correcting the accounting errors, and saving the bank's license. I did it all for a risk consultant's salary that was less than Tyler's annual travel budget. I never told Arthur. I carried that secret like a heavy, invisible chain, letting Jeffrey and Tyler take the credit for the stability I had manufactured. Tyler once told me that banking was for men who could handle the pressure, not girls who read spreadsheets. He had no idea that the spreadsheet I was reading at that very moment was the only thing preventing his private yacht from being repossessed. He had no idea that his entire lifestyle was a subscription service that I was personally authorized to cancel. I rubbed my eyes, trying to summon a flicker of regret, but there was only clarity. My family had been a non-performing asset in my life. My compassion had been a luxury they'd overdrafted for years, and now the limit had been reached. Arthur had known. He hadn't left me an envelope of scraps. He had left me the coordinates for the only place where I wouldn't have to wear the chain anymore. The heat of Dubai hit me the second the cabin door opened, a thick, gold-scented blanket. I stepped onto the tarmac and my phone buzzed. The family group chat was in a feeding frenzy. Stephanie, my mother, had posted photos of a $50 million estate in the Cotswolds. "Legacy is everything," the caption said. Tyler had posted a picture of a gold-plated steering wheel from a showroom in Mayfair. They were intoxicated by the sheer volume of zeros they thought they now controlled. They were loud, and they were completely, dangerously diluted. I opened a private message from my father. It arrived at 11:51 p.m., London time. It said, "Jordan, don't bother coming back to your company apartment. We've decided to lease it out." Your envelope inheritance should cover a cheap motel. We've moved your things to a storage unit in Slough. Consider the account settled. I almost laughed at the screen. In his haste to punish me, Jeffrey had just committed an illegal eviction under UK housing law without a formal notice period. He was too blinded by arrogance to realize he'd just handed me my first legal slam dunk before I even touched down in London. Every move they made was now a liability I could use against them. I stared at the screen. They weren't just taking the bank, they were actively scrubbing me out of the narrative. My parents were parading around London like masters of the universe, but their authority was a hollowed out shell. They had fallen into a trap where people confuse having wealth with being powerful. They didn't realize that their position was just a luxury they were renting, with debt they didn't know they owned. Psychologically, their sudden cruelty was a defense mechanism. They were overcompensating for years of secret financial failure by trying to crush the one person who could prove they weren't the geniuses they claimed to be. Their arrogance was on borrowed time. The car glided to a halt in front of a tower of glass and steel, the Dubai International Financial Center. As I stepped out, a man in a tailored charcoal suit was waiting. He held a simple sign that sent a jolt of electricity through my spine. Miss Jordan Thompson, Sovereign Successor. I am Alexander, he said, his voice a low hum. His Serene Highness is looking forward to meeting you. He has been managing your trust's Monaco holdings personally for several years. We entered an office that was more of a vault than a place of business. Miss Thompson, your family believes Arthur left them an empire. They are mistaken. He left them a stage. He left the keys to the vault to you. He gestured to a port on the console. I reached into my bag and pulled out the old silver fountain pen. I unscrewed the barrel, revealing a hidden military-grade hardware security token, the master key to the Sovereign Trust's encrypted servers. I inserted the token into the shielded port. There was a soft, melodic chime, and the walls of the room flickered to life with holographic displays. The Thompson International Trust, Alexander announced. Current net asset value, $2,500,000,000. My breath caught, but I didn't let my expression waver. Controlling interest in luxury hospitality in Singapore, Tokyo real estate, and then the Sovereign Alpha Fund. I leaned forward. The fund didn't just hold assets, it held debt. Specifically, it had spent the last decade quietly acquiring the non-performing loans and high-interest liabilities of Thompson Global Banking, my family's bank. Arthur didn't just leave me money, I whispered. He moved the bank's foundation into this trust. Alexander nodded. Precisely. Your father and brother think they inherited a $60 million estate. In reality, they inherited a beautifully decorated debt trap. Your trust owns their mortgages. It owns their operational capital. It owns the very air they breathe in that boardroom. The board of directors is already moving to strip Jeffrey of his chairmanship, Alexander added, his voice cold. They've been suspicious of the missing liquidity for months. They were simply waiting for the lead creditor to trigger a formal default and demand an audit. That creditor, Miss Thompson, is you. I sat back in the leather chair, the silver pen still gripped in my hand. My parents had just evicted me from a company apartment I technically owned. Alexander slid a physical folder across the obsidian desk. This is a kill shot, Jordan, he said. I opened it. Inside was a loan application for $100 million, dated exactly 3 days before Arthur's heart stopped. But it was the signature at the bottom that made my blood turn to ice. It was Arthur's sharp, elegant. But I had spent a decade auditing the risk of this bank. I knew every tremor in Arthur's hand during those final weeks. This signature was too perfect. They were drowning, Alexander explained. Jeffrey didn't just forge a signature. He bribed a senior compliance officer to notarize a fraudulent power of attorney while you were in Dubai. They used that illegal document to bypass the bank's internal triggers and secure a $100 million emergency credit line just to hide the massive hole in their balance sheet before the funeral. I looked at the document. Jeffrey and Stephanie hadn't just stolen a seat at the table. They had gambled with the family's freedom. They thought they were clever. They thought the old man was too far gone to notice. But Arthur was never far gone. He knew. He watched them do it. He didn't stop them because he wanted the evidence to be undeniable. The moment that loan was funded, he had me use your sovereign wealth fund to buy the note. He didn't just move his assets for you, Jordan. He bought your parents' crimes. I closed the folder. The sound echoed like a gavel. They didn't inherit an empire. They inherited a criminal liability that I now controlled. They were building a life on a foundation of forgery, unaware that their daughter was the one holding the warrant. Prepare the formal notice of default, I said, my voice like ice. I want it delivered to the house in the Cotswolds during their housewarming party. The drive to the Cotswolds was a study in silence. I sat in the back of a car that cost more than my parents' entire neighborhood. I wasn't there for the scenery. I was there for the final audit. The $60 million estate was glowing under the soft evening lights. My parents were hosting their housewarming party, a celebration of a legacy they hadn't earned. Laughter spilled out of the open French doors, along with the scent of vintage champagne. I didn't wait for an invitation. I walked through the front doors, my boots clicking a clinical rhythm on the limestone floors. The conversation died as I entered the drawing room. Stephanie, my mother, was draped in silk. Her smile vanished the moment she saw me. "Jordan, what are you doing here?" she asked, her voice sharp with unearned authority. "I thought we made it clear that you weren't part of this new chapter." Jeffrey, my father, stepped forward. "I told you to stay away. You're embarrassing us. This house is for winners, not for girls with used pins and motel bills." I didn't answer his anger with volume. I answered it with a blue folder. I set it on the mahogany table. "I'm not here for the party, Jeffrey," I said. "I'm here for the repossession," Tyler barked a laugh. "Repossession? You finally lost your mind, Jordan. This is our house. We inherited it. Actually, you inherited a debt trap. In that folder, you'll find the formal notice of default for the $100 million loan you took out 3 days before Arthur died, the one with the forged signature." The room went so still I could hear the bubbles popping in their champagne. Jeffrey's hands started to shake. Stephanie's face turned the color of ash. "How do you have this?" my father whispered. "Because I own the fund that bought your failure. I am the landlord of this estate. I am the owner of the bank you nearly bankrupted, and that car Tyler is planning to buy. I've already canceled the credit line. This was the power flip." The vultures were suddenly the ones being picked apart. My father reached out, his eyes red and pleading. "Jordan, please! We're family! You can't do this to us! Think about your mother. Think about your brother." I looked at him, and I felt absolutely nothing. No regret, no hesitation. This wasn't a family drama anymore. It was an accounting error that had finally been corrected. "I already did think about you," I replied. "For 26 years, I thought about your reputations and your bank, while you treated me like an overhead cost. I spent my life being the load-bearing wall for a family that never wanted me under their roof." I checked my watch. "It was 9 p.m. You have 1 hour to pack your things. There's a cab waiting at the gate to take you to the apartment in Slough, the one you tried to put me in. Goodbye, Mom. Goodbye, Dad. Consider the account settled." I signaled to the 3 men in dark suits standing discreetly by the foyer, certified bailiffs and private security I'd retained through the trust. "These gentlemen will escort you out and ensure only your personal items are removed," I added. The sight of legal enforcement turned my father's outrage into a frantic, panicked silence. I turned and walked out, leaving them standing in the wreckage of their stolen empire. Inside, my heart was finally at peace, not because of the billions, but because I had finally stopped playing a game where the rules were designed to make me lose. The silence that followed was the most expensive thing I had ever earned. It was a buoyant silence. For the first time in 26 years, the accounts were balanced. I didn't feel a surge of triumph as I watched my parents pack their suitcases. I just felt an immense clarity. The family bank is no longer a monument to Jeffrey's gambling. It has been restructured into the Arthur and Jordan Foundation. I decided that the best way to honor Arthur's legacy wasn't to hoard the gold, but to use it to find the other architects hiding in the shadows. We now provide seed capital and risk consulting to young professionals whose families try to stifle their potential, the ones who are told they are just to spare. I've come to realize that your worth isn't determined by the name you carry or the station others assign to you. If you find yourself in a similar situation, feeling invisible or devalued, remember this. The load-bearing walls are often the ones no one notices until they decide to stop carrying the weight. Forgiveness isn't always for the other person. Sometimes it's the only way to set yourself free from the balance sheet of their expectations. To those of you who feel like you're living at the edge of your own family, don't wait for them to hand you a seat at the table. Take your envelope, whatever it may be, your talent, your resilience, your silent labor, and go build your own empire. You don't need their permission to be luminous. If this story reminded you of your own worth, please hit the share button. Let's show the world that the overlooked ones are usually the ones holding the key to the future. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss our next story of justice and transformation.